Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. I've been in Washington for the past few days at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, not just dinner, but the weekend, really the week. It's been really enlightening. People very excited to see Vice President Harris, the nominee for the Democratic Party, and President Biden. It was very interesting. Reverend Jeanette Wilson and Sue Udry, Defending Rights and Dissent Executive Director, and Ed Yonka, Director of Public Policy and Communications at the ACLU of Illinois. And of course, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, she is a pastor, a theologian, she is a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, a defense lawyer. So this is perfect for you. People were shouting to free Palestine throughout the speech. And then, this is really a crowd of, really, I would say the Black elite, if you will. Every group has their class. And, some people were shifting very uncomfortably in their seats. But I said, this is going to be a real issue. So, as well it ought to be, in my opinion. I'm not speaking for anyone on the panel. But that having been said, there's some issues that I think that we need to look at. When I turned on the television and saw that it was, we were saluting the Constitution, I said, oh, wait a minute. I think we need to step back and look at this take the 30,000-foot view and look at the weeds and whatnot, because everyone keeps saying that we need to save the democracy. And we have to save the republic. It's a constitutional republic, everybody, that has democratic functions. If you don't believe that, look at the legislative branch of our federal government. One group are elected, another group are elected. No matter what happens with a U.S. representative, if that seat is vacated, there's a mandatory election, but not so with the U.S. Senate. That's where you see democracy and the republicanism at play. That having been said, who are we? And can we trust the institutions that enforce and interpret the Constitution? Does the Constitution change with the times? They say it's a living, breathing document. Certainly, it's not the same document that we saw as they were drafting it for, my goodness, for more than a decade, Ed Yonka. What we got in 1789 that's not the iteration that we're living with and that we are looking for today. But I really want to know, so what do we want today? And is it a living, breathing document? You've got a lot of originalists on the court who say, wait a minute, we need to go back to what the founding fathers said. I'm like, but many of them owned slaves. Women could not vote. They were genociding indigenous people. I don't think we want to go back there. Certainly, I don't. And there were debates amongst the founding fathers about all of these issues at that time. There were debates about whether the president should be a king. George Washington said, no, don't do that. We just left that. Let's move forward. And as human, I would say, as these men are, I think that's the term flawed is overwrought. They were human beings, but they had great enlightened ideas, particularly for men of their time. For them not to establish a monarchy here, to push back against it, that was huge. We're still running after monarchs today. And we have such a fascination with needing to worship people. We've turned, okay, we reject monarchy, but we have oligarchy. We love reading about all of the billionaires who are on track to become trillionaires. We love it. We love it. We love it. But the fact is, most Americans are really struggling economically. And now I would say spiritually, particularly as we in the next hour deal with the second assassination attempt upon Donald Trump. Whatever you feel about him, that speaks to a toxic political atmosphere that's not unique to this moment. But it's a real thing. It's a real thing. We've got to deal with that. But I want to know just where we are today, because now there are questions about the Supreme Court. Can we trust them? Most Americans do not. Most Americans feel, Sue, let me write to you, because I know defending rights and dissent, and more, it seems like, Ed Yonka, you've got your plate full, because More and more, it seems that we are not able to freely express ourselves. But the state of the U.S. Constitution, as we celebrate it today, I guess in these general terms, as we look at television, but the fact is, it is what we live under every day. What is the state of the Constitution? I know that's a broad question, but there's so much going on. So much going on. We have three Supreme Court justices who essentially lied to the Senate. They said they would not touch Roe. They said, Roe v. Wade is established law. But they went on there clearly with the intention of doing just that. They said this is the most corporatist court that we have had since we started measuring these things 100 years ago. So, Udry, defending rights and dissent, this is made for you. Everybody on this panel, this is your topic. Go.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here with Ed and the Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson. I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. Yeah, so to just hone in on the Supreme Court, they are rolling us back, right? We've had expansion of the idea of individual freedoms and rights through the years. Different Supreme Court cases have expanded our understanding, particularly of the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court is hell-bent on rolling it back and not, they're using, I would say, originalism as an excuse, but, or as their kind of, as their beard, right, to do what they want to do, which is make America great for the corporatists, for the rich. That's my cynical point of view. And Santita, I just want to note that today is Constitution Day, and on December 15th, that is Bill of Rights Day. So the Bill of Rights is what gives the individuals the freedom, like the Constitution lays out, the Electoral College, please. I mean, this is how we, sorry, I'm talking too much. Let's see what everybody else has to say.
No, you're not talking too much, because it seems all of these things are lining up.
Yeah.
But while they're lining up, Sue Udry, Executive Director of Defending Rights and Dissent, no one is talking about it. What does the Constitution mean? And yet people say we're on the verge of a civil war. What were we fighting about? So no, don't stop, because we're not having a fleshed out. Most of us, they've taken civics out of schools. We don't even know what's in it.
Yeah.
So what is the Bill of Rights? What are they? What do they do for us? Sue.
Well, so the Bill of Rights was not originally part of the Constitution, right? And the people trusted the legislators enough to come back in a few years to add the Bill of Rights, which gives us our individual liberties. Our organization looks particularly at the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, which is to be free from the government telling us what to think and say, and free from the government rifling through our possessions. And so to me, those are two keys to our to individuals being able to live in a country and maintain their individualhood, if you will. So yeah, I find the Constitution a little inscrutable with, because it's all about how the government functions, whereas the Bill of Rights is, here's what the government is not going to impose on you, individual people.
Are we adhering to the Constitution these days, or do you think it's?
So, I don't know. What do you all? I'm not a lawyer. Let's hear from the lawyers.
Okay. I'm just asking, even as a citizen, or would you like to take this, Reverend Jeanette Wilson, because you have been in criminal defense, you've been in civil rights, you've also been in the church, which our founding framers said, hey, we're going to keep the church and the government separate, and yet more and more we're seeing a conflation of the two. Reverend Wilson, let me start with you. My apologies to you, Ed Yonka, but let me
go ahead, Ed. Well, I think that one of the things we should note that the Bill of Rights really talks about how individuals are protected within this Constitution, or at least they try to define it. And so many people have misinterpreted the Bill of Rights to an extreme because when all of this was done, African Americans were not considered people. When the Constitution was written and when the Bill of Rights were codified. One is the freedom of religion. So the, the government does not impose a religion on us. If you remember, when they left England, they had a religion. There was a there was the state and the religion, and they were working together. And if you remember what did they call him? In the High Church in London, he had as much power as the Queen over what happened politically as well as socially. In America, the church, whatever the church is, does not have the authority to impose its religion on all people. We don't have a uniform religion in America. That's one thing. But we have the freedom to worship whatever God we choose, however we choose, and under whatever circumstances we choose. Then there's this whole Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, which has been misinterpreted to such a large degree. Because at the time they had the Second Amendment was written, we did not have a standing army. We did not have the kind of militia, the Army, Navy, our Air Force to protect the country. We didn't have it at that time, nor did they anticipate individuals having military style weapons. We did not have assault weapons at the time of the Second Amendment. And it gave people a sense of you're free to, not to have your homes intruded by people from the government. Yet we do know that police are now violating all of the right to be secure in one's home. We know that didn't happen with Breonna Taylor. We know that didn't happen with the lady in Chicago. So we are seeing violations of the first 10 amendments on a regular basis. The due process, many people who are incarcerated uh, are denied due process by virtue of the fact
Mhm.
how who represents them and who fights for just basic rights, right to a speedy trial. I was trained by R. Eugene Pincham, Justice R. Eugene Pincham, and others in our law office. We were to demand trial on arraignment so that the clock started running the day that you were charged. Either you were arraigned or indicted. That day, the speedy trial, they had to go to trial within a certain number of days in the state. Many defendants are sitting in our county jails because their rights to a speedy trial are being violated each and every day. They can't afford a lawyer, or if they're represented by the public defender, they have such a high caseload, and Ed Yonka knows this, they can't handle the volume of criminal cases that are on the docket for them. And so these are in state courts. I'm not counting federal courts. And so you see our rights as individuals are being violated each and every day. But because we don't teach civics, most people don't even know when they're being violated. And if you don't have resources, you don't fight like people who have resources do. You don't know how to make sure that your rights in a civil case or in a criminal case are protected. And then this whole idea of excessive bail. We know for sure your father took us to jail to visit the people that were waiting trial. Some of them had been in jail for 7 years
Mm.
with no trial, no hearings. And Ed knows this. ACLU has been fighting against this for a number of years. That's not only was the bail excessive, we had to fight to make sure that on misdemeanor cases, you were not setting these high bails. No one was injured. Maybe it was just theft of property or something, but no person was harmed physically. Why do you have somebody sitting in jail for 7 years in the county jail? Uh, so, and then when you look at the Constitution, civil rights cases, you don't have many lawyers that are handling civil rights cases because there's no money up front. Most of the time, the clients don't have any money, and so you won't get paid until you win the cases. So that has deterred a number of lawyers from going into that kind of practice unless they're working with some university or some organization that funds them. And so, yes, the Constitution is under attack right now because you have some people who are interpreting presidential powers to the extreme. The president has certain powers guaranteed by the Constitution. However, presidential powers, presidential immunity is a big question that's now before the Supreme Court that is already slanted to the far right. And so the question is, how much power does a president have to commit crime and not be held accountable for it? So that's
Well,
just.
no, it's a lot. I mean, Edyanka, help me because now you have everyone running under the banner, and please, you can respond to them, make your own statement, however you want to go with this. We're hearing that the democracy is at risk. Oops, I'm hearing something.
It's my airplane.
Oh, it's okay. It's all right. I got you.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Trying to figure that out.
the thing is, we've got the democracy is at risk. I'm like, well, is the democracy at risk or is the Constitution at risk? I mean, what in your mind, before I can even get to that, is the state of the Constitution? I mean, to hear that someone's been in jail for 7 years and longer.
Yeah. So, I want to pull back just a second, Santita, because I think this question about Constitution Day, sparks for me going back to the preamble of the Constitution. And when you think about it, what was it we were guaranteed? We were guaranteed a document that moved us towards a more fair society, a better union, a more perfect union. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. They understood it wasn't. They understood there were people already who were being left to the side, even at the time of the framing. And so our job in successive generations is really to try to keep that movement towards a more perfect union. I think that Sue describes this well in that, even when you look at the Bill of Rights, there was a lengthy period of time after the Bill of Rights were established when the Supreme Court of the United States never ruled for an individual when it came to a free speech case, never ruled for them until the 20th century. Now we have a number of rulings where they do. But I think when I think about all of this work together, our job isn't to save democracy, it's to fix democracy. It is to make democracy better. We're living in a time when there's no one, if you look at the current presidential race, right? There is nobody who believes that either candidate can win the popular vote. We all know which candidate is going to win the popular vote. The question is which candidate will eke out just enough electoral votes from which states, winning some of those states by a handful of votes, while, instead of the popular vote. That's one area where, when I think about where we need to go with fixing or saving democracy, we need to end the Electoral College. We also need to think about the fact that we have a system in terms of our republic, our representative government, where it takes 54 people in California to get the same amount of representation for one person in Wyoming in the United States Senate. But a bunch of people who represent very small states, because of the filibuster, can block all legislation from moving forward in the U.S. Senate and therefore in the U.S. Congress. That's madness in the world that we live in today. The reality is that, we need a democracy which keeps up and which is part of a modern society. I want to say one more thing, Dr. Wilson, I'm sorry, but the last thing I want to say is, when you talk about the originalists on our Supreme Court, and they're hearkening back to wanting to look at the original text of the Constitution, the original meaning, ignores the fact that the original Constitution contemplated amendments, and among those amendments were the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, which tried to address some of the fundamental wrongs in the original Constitution. Want to read them out of the Constitution when they interpret modern day law. This is madness. This is not the way that our constitutional system is supposed to work. It's not just a living, breathing document. It is an expanding, evolving document, which is meant to, try to deal with an increasingly diverse, complex society. We just need people who recognize that.
But what is it with the originals? You said that there was a shift in the court, that only in the 20th century did the court start looking at individuals. Really, what happened?
Well, what you really saw happen is that in the early part of the 20th century, especially after World War II, you began to see justices who read the Constitution to actually embody the principles of, say, the First Amendment. You saw, for example, free speech cases in which they did not any longer allow the government to, say, imprison people for protesting against a war or protesting against particular governmental policy. And that expanded throughout the 20th century to include, developments in the criminal justice area and a whole range of other things. And what we saw was exactly what we often see in history, which is a pendulum swing back and the growth of a robust conservative legal movement, which is now dominating our Supreme Court, that attempts to read those rights out of the Constitution in favor of big government, in favor of big corporations, and frankly, in favor of big court. What this particular Supreme Court likes more than anything else is for the final arbiter of all public policy to be the 9 justices of the Supreme Court.
See, I think part of what you were talking about, Ed, Supreme Court justices serve for life unless they choose to retire. Why would you retire from a job that you can keep for life and you have unrestricted benefits? Because there's no one that has oversight over the United States Supreme Court. Every other judicial body in the states have an oversight. And so if you get out of line...
Wait a minute, Reverend Wilson, every branch of government, every office.
But I'm saying the court was seen as this supreme body of individuals that would move beyond themselves and their political ideologies, and they would rule in favor of justice and right, which they are not doing and have not done. And so if there are no term limits, you appoint a court, it lasts for decades. And so we're stuck with a court right now that if they continue as they are, that's why Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she fought hard to just stay alive, because this court she could see it swinging so far to the left. And when you have a Supreme Court justice that is the head of the court, that is not operating in a middle, bringing everybody back to the middle, to center, so they need term limits. If you're talking about improving this democracy, you need term limits for the Supreme Court, and you need oversight. They should be impeached when they violate the law, when they take bribes while sitting on the court. And we have 3 of them now that should be removed just based on unethical behavior. And
but it won't. Well, I'm not going to say it won't happen. Ed Yonka, Sue Utri, and Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson. But the chances seem slim. You see the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice. I'm trying to get over the fact that they call themselves justice, because to me that's the ultimate hubris. I'm just, I think that's part of the problem here, because they embody justice. I'm like, no, you don't.
But then you got to look at who puts them on the bench. A president can only nominate. That's the executive branch. It takes the Senate to approve any recommendation by the president. So if the Senate is in line with the president, whoever the president recommends, they will be confirmed. If the president and the Senate are not in sync, they won't be allowed to sit on the court. And so now you have 2 presidents that have not Biden placed 1 person on the court. Trump filled several seats, 3 seats on the Supreme Court, and 1/3 of the federal courts, because before you get to the Supreme Court, you have to go through these federal and appellate courts. And these are just the federal system, not counting the people that run in the state courts. And, if you really want democracy, we have to understand what the process is. And then we will know, as Ed keeps talking about, how do we make democracy work better for everyone?
Well, don't we first need to understand what a republic is? What the difference between a constitutional monarchy and a constitutional republic is?
That's one.
And then, because in fact, Flora said, isn't the Electoral College unconstitutional? And I guess, Flora, I would extend that and ask, um, is it democratic? Because we're saying we want to, Ed, we're going to save the democracy. And you went to the Electoral College. She's talking to you.
Yeah. But, well, the Electoral College is part of the Constitution. Therefore, it is constitutional. We need to change it. And part of that is we have a constitutional process for changing it. We also have a process that is working out in many of the states to try to create this electoral compact where enough states that control the majority of electoral votes would agree to vote for the majority or for the popular election winner, even if their state didn't vote for that person. So there are mechanisms for doing that. And I think there are ways that we can, advance that work. I actually think this thing of getting, as happens sometimes, because you'll hear that when people will say, well, we need to save the democracy. And then you'll hear somebody say, oh, but we're not a democracy, we're a democratic republic. I think that's quibbling. I think the question is, how do we get it so that we are more reflective of the democratic principles that we want to see at the core of the way that we create government, of the mechanism for creating the policies that control many of our lives. I think that's the piece, that I want to focus on. I think, there's an interesting debate about exactly what the structure is, but how do we create that more perfect union that better reflects the kind of values that we want in terms of governing? And I think that's one of the things that I'd really like to see. Look, and just to be, you've asked the question a couple of times about, how or if the democracy is at risk. The democracy, by its very definition, is at risk when you have people who go into the public square and literally declare, I will not accept the results of a free and fair election. It's only fair if I win. That isn't a democracy.
Well, the other thing
Well,
is,
see, but if I may interrupt you, Reverend Wilson, the reason I keep parsing constitutional republic and democracy is because, just as I read not just books, but the papers and letters of our founding fathers, they thought that the democracy was going to lead to mob rule. And it's not just urban legend. I mean, Benjamin Franklin was actually asked,
yeah, but in a pure
what kind
democracy,
of government have you given us to keep it a republic, if you can keep it?
But in a pure democracy, you might have a plebiscite, for example, a vote on every single issue. We don't do that. We elect representatives to go and represent us. Where we're failing in that process is that too often we are changing the rules, we're shading the rules, we're creating, ways in which those people don't actually represent the interest of the voters who send them.
well, they don't.
But Ed, but you know what? I would assert this, because you still went 200 odd years ago when we were forming this more perfect union. Everybody didn't want to separate from England. I'm wondering if we're all on the same page here. I mean, really, because you did have royalists, and I think you have royalists today.
True.
Yeah, everybody didn't want to rebuild a new thing. But however, once they got here, the more perfect union was designed that you elect people that would represent you in Washington. And what we find now is they go to Washington, but they really have not polled the people that they are called to represent. So they don't even know what the people want, except when every 4 years we vote for president. The Congress runs every 2 years, the Senate every 6. But when you look at this whole electoral college that will vote against the will of the people, that's not democracy at all. And I'm gonna ask all of you, who is your elector from your state? None of us know who they are. Who picks them? We don't vote for, say, Santita, you're gonna be my elector, and I vote for you. That doesn't happen.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to vote the way I want to. I mean, not to mention the fact that it's a system. We have to have a system that has integrity, that
Yeah,
everyone believes in.
yeah,
Years ago, what, 2, 3 decades ago, as they were moving toward a machine-driven system, Sue,
Mhm.
Reverend Jackson, Ed, Reverend Wilson, you were there with him. He said, this is going to be bad
it is.
because they're hacking everything all the time. I mean, the fact is, I mean, I reject the term conspiracy theorist because I know that that is a creation of the CIA to get me not to question. And I have a problem with that coming out of the civil rights movement. You know, I have an issue with that. I have the right to question. And I know, as Dr. King said, uh, evil men plot, conspiracy, therefore good men must plan. So I got that too. I mean, my thing is just because I don't think Ed, Sue, Reverend Wilson, I don't think we're all on the same page here. I really, I mean, because, because there's some people who really believe that the rich ought to run everything. They
Mhm.
do.
They do.
And and that your privileges, I mean, you see how it's not just how Washington is run, it's how they're doing this. Some people are protected. Every indictment is political.
Yeah.
If someone is if they can be used by the empire, they get a pass. They could kill someone in the middle of the street in New York. Isn't that what Donald Trump said?
That's what he said. Well, we're 300 million people, so yeah, we're not all going to be on the same page, right? But what we can do, what those of us who are righteous, right thinking, and who care about democracy, or who care, to me, more importantly, about social justice and economic justice, you need to be out in the streets. You need to be raising your voice. You need to be voting. Voting is the lowest bar, right? The next up is you're out there in the streets. You're writing to your members of Congress. You're making sure that they hear from you and know what you want. And the problem is that in states across the country and in Congress, and God forbid the Supreme Court gets to weigh in on this, they are really narrowing the definition of the First Amendment and our right to assemble and our right to protest. And so to me, it's like we're not going to get these changes without powerful action by the people, right? No senator's going to wave his, and I say that on purpose, his magic wand
Thank you.
and give us what we need, give us the changes that we need. We are going to need to be organized and fight for it, right? And they're really trying to undermine our ability to organize and our ability to be in solidarity with each other.
Well, I think that most people don't even know who their U.S. senators are. It's two for every state, and they don't. You ask people, and Santita, you know this. You ask them, "Who's your U.S. senator?" They don't even know the difference between state
Yeah.
and federal. And if we can't keep voting for people that we never talk to after we vote for them.
But we're not voting, Reverend Wilson. I mean, people come to me all the time, and I know they come to everybody here because they need help.
Yeah,
I will ask them, well, who's your representative?
we don't know.
And they all look at me and they go, huh? Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, they say it with incredulity. I'm like, wait a minute. You're coming to me. You're not coming to the person who has been elected. Whether you voted or not, you voted.
Well, but I think they don't understand the relationship between a vote and action on their behalf. When those students decided to protest at the colleges, those colleges are funded by federal and state dollars. So if the students had called their congressperson, their state reps, to protect themselves, one, and to get change, many of them didn't even think of that. They're out and protesting, but you had to protest against the system that controls you. I remember we demonstrated at my college. We knew who the board of trustees were, who they were. You have to exercise power, and you hit points of power. And I think we have to go back teaching civics because it's not taught, and I don't think that's an accident in school anymore. We have to go back to civics 101. What do what do these representatives do? What powers do they have? And why should you care about who they are? Only a few congressmen have town hall meetings with their members. So they're in Washington. You don't live in Washington, so you have no idea what they're doing and what issues they're voting on your behalf. We have to hold our elected officials more accountable. And we have to And we have to understand the legal powers that they possess to protect us or to harm us. Our country has moved towards a two-party system only, pretty much. You see you got a Green Party and you get people coming up with a party, but there's basically a two-party system in America, which does not represent the interests of all the people in America. That's another piece of this changing the political landscape. So you have a Congress that's sitting there fighting Democratic or Republican. Never, where are the people in that? I like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah, well, I do too. I mean, Ed,
Yeah,
help me because the fact is that many people call it the uni party.
yeah,
Yeah.
My father's always has been saying for years, it's one party with two different wings.
that's all. That's all.
They have different cultural appeals, and in the meantime, the basic needs of the people are not being met.
They're not even addressed because there's no voice to them saying, if you fail to do this, reason I like that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington movie, you taught people in that movie, how do you impact government? It's your government. And you have to organize groups of people like Reverend did when he ran for president. We went across the 11 southern states and energized people, explained to them who they need to vote for. There were states in the South that had not elected a Black person since Reconstruction to anything. And so organizing that it empowered people. They realized, oh, I can vote for county sheriff. I can vote for county commissioner. I don't have to have this redneck standing at the door telling me I got to vote a certain way. I can replace him. People don't know the power that they have, Ed.
I agree, and you're so right. And Santita, you touched on this, but the other element of this is that to do that organizing and create the power doesn't end the day we cast the ballot, right? I was just at the University of Illinois in Champaign in Urbana last night doing a talk, and I was really impressed with these students because I asked them how many of them had ever gone to a public meeting at the local level, a city council meeting, a library board, a school board, something like that. And about a third of them actually had, and a handful of them had actually spoken at one of those meetings. That is, even beyond thinking about your United States Senator, I think we probably have all been fortunate enough to be able to speak directly to U.S. senators and U.S. members of Congress. But the fact is that at that local level where so much of the governing has been done, you have access to that every month. You have access to that all the time. And the ability, where you see these things that we want to correct, where you don't think an issue is being heard, you can literally go and raise it yourself. You can be the one to make that part of the agenda. It is such an important power that we all have. And we shouldn't sacrifice it, even if we're the only person in the room who cares about that particular issue. It is amazing. I always think it's remarkable the number of times that somebody goes and says, well, I'm the only person I think who feels this way. And they say it, and pretty soon there's two or three other people saying, well, I agree with you. I think the same thing. Like, that is what this is about. And holding that, and sort of having that, playing that sort of role is so important. I'm sorry, I just have to say one thing. We're lucky here in Illinois where we are that we don't have the situation where we've seen a lot of book bans, right? Mm-hmm. But there have been attempts at book bans in a lot of places across Illinois. Here's what almost always happens. 3 or 4 people show up at a library board, a school board, they complain about a book. And for the first meeting, the board members sort of look at them and think, ooh, our community kind of feels this way. By the second or third meeting where that's on the agenda, there are 10 people showing up to defend the book. And those 4 people have disappeared because they're too afraid to defend their position. The reality is that when you speak up, you not only speak up for yourself, but you create the space and the permission structure for other people to speak out as well.
But you're absolutely right. But I think that Reverend Wilson made this point, and Defending Rights and Dissent makes this point every day. When you're shutting down dissent, when you're shutting down different voices in corporate media, And that's what's happening every day. Even in our political discourse, we cannot ask questions about medicines without being called a conspiracy theorist. It's a way of shutting you down. You can't, if you want to talk about, if you want to question even the integrity of the election and just say, you know what, I'm not saying I would go where former President Trump has gone, but to say, you know what, I'm kind of careful with my computer on a good day. What do they say? It's not the vote that counts, it's who's counting the votes. Because I mean, there's just we have to be very careful. And if people have questions about the integrity of the system, let's speak to them. And let's make sure that the system has integrity. But you can't do that when you can't ask the questions.
Well, and I think part of it is when the meetings are held. I've been to Board of Election meetings as you have. But if it's in the daytime, if your job doesn't allow you the flexibility to attend these meetings, city council meeting in the daytime, we made them change school board meetings to nights. Because you want parents, you said parents won't come. Yeah, if it's at night, I'm not going to take off work to go. I would love to, but I lose if I'm a hourly worker. I will lose money just to attend a school board meeting. So we have to demand that these local bodies make it convenient for us to attend. Most people have never been to Springfield, in Illinois, but never been to your state capital to see what's going on. We used to take children, graduate from 8th grade, you went to Springfield. You
Right.
graduate from high school, you went to DC so you could see Congress and meet your congressperson. We got to go back to meeting with our elected officials. We pay them a nice salary with benefits, and we don't tend to communicate with them at all. So I think some of it is educating voters. Every organization has to begin to re-educate voters of their rights because they don't even know they have rights half the time, and demand to see your. When are you going to have a meeting so I can come? Just call them up and ask them. They have to do that. If 10 people call, they will change behavior.
Mhm.
Because he knows every person represents 10 and so forth. And if you got 100 people upset, your congressman, your senator will respond. And if they don't, go on the radio and talk about it.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you, Jeanette.
I just want them to know what to do.
But but let me tell you, you're right. Because Ed, Yanka, Sue Udry, when that happens, people start jumping and they pay attention.
They do.
Yeah, we don't have civics in the schools anymore, and so that role of educating people has fallen on civil society, on U.S. nonprofits, on advocacy groups. People don't learn in high school what their rights are. They need to do know your rights from the ACLU or the National Lawyers Guild, right? They don't. People don't know. Your average high school young man driving a car down the street doesn't know that he does not need to answer the questions of the cops, right? If they stop him in the street, it's like, you don't talk to the cops. We try to hammer that into people. You don't need to talk to them. And who is your local representative, or who's going to get people to go to a school board meeting? It's the American Library Association saying, whoa, or it's the librarians just alerting the community, hey, there's, people trying to ban these books. Y'all need to come out. So it's a rare person. There are people, but it's pretty rare, a person who follows what's going on and motivates themselves to get out to a meeting or to write a letter to their representative or write a letter to the editor about an issue, right? It's really people, civil society really helps people be engaged in our democracy. And that's what we need to have a strong democracy, is people need to be engaged. They need to be like, what the hell, the Electoral College? Come on, people. Right?
I think Ed has you've struck the match on this show, but I mean,
that's what he does.
But no, he does. That's why I'm a little scared. But Ed, is it well, of course it's possible. But do you think that people, what would it take to
It'll
get
take
rid
a
of the
lot.
Electoral College?
So, Santita, it'll take a lot. because part of making, a constitutional amendment would require, approval from like 38 states. There's a lot of states that aren't going to want to give up that power. Here's the one thing I know: until we start the discussion, we aren't closer to getting it done.
Okay.
That's the only thing that I'm sure of. And I think after this election, it is one of the conversations that we should have, is that if we're really about the business of trying to preserve and save the democracy, if that's really our goal in this election cycle, then it shouldn't be left up to just a handful of states. All of us ought to have a say in what that looks like. And I think the only way that we're ever going to get to that point is for some of us, many of us, hopefully a whole bunch of us, to begin to have that conversation and to begin to, to move forward on that. I do have to throw in, just because I don't want to forget it here, that I'm happy to say that the legislature in Illinois did a couple of years ago put civics back in high schools across Illinois. And so there is a requirement for civics education. It's one semester and should be integrated into a whole bunch of things as we go along. But it's a beginning point, I think, for us on these issues as we move forward.
I remember that little blue book that we had to look at in the spring, that we had to learn. And it wasn't a little blue book. It was a nice blue book, and we would all just groan. But it's true, we would. But
some of us liked it, Santita. I will just say, I will acknowledge.
Well, I'm going to tell you,
I didn't like it, but
I groaned but I mistakenly told my father, and he said, "Oh no, this is so important." He even followed me up to my room that night. "Where did you bring the book home? Let me show you why this is so important." He's a bit of a policy nerd. People don't know that, but it's true. He was like, "Let me tell you why this is important, and you need to understand the Bill of Rights, and you need to read the preamble. You need to read it." And I'm really glad that he did that. And we have to, if we're going to be citizens and not subjects, we have to get involved. I don't know. I can't put it any more plainly than that.
And I think that students should have field trips in their city to the city council meetings. They should take them on field trips to the state legislature. We used to do that. And take them to DC so they can see how laws are made. And we should be required. I used to have to read the Weekly Reader so I know what was happening in the news outside of my little world.
Oh my gosh.
We had to read the Weekly Reader. And now these kids don't even know who the mayor of their city. They don't know any of this.
Well, because you said this rather purposefully. Yeah. Purposefully. We're dumbing down Americans.
We are.
And it is purposeful, because enlightened, educated people, and I'm not saying you need a PhD. No, I'm saying that people who really know what's going on are hard to manage.
They are.
And the thing is, if we're going to be part of this American experiment and experience, I don't want to be managed. I want to be governed, and I need to give you permission to do that. And so I think, I want to give everyone about a minute and a half here to kind of close us out, because we're gonna deem you have to give Ed Yonka his preacher's license.
Yeah.
Because I see it coming, or maybe a rabbi's license, whatever, or if maybe you need to be a priest. I don't know. Whatever it is, you need a license. Or because I think each of you, the reason I called each of you is because you really have a ministerial zeal about our freedom and liberty. And I'm hoping that as everyone's talking about democracy and liberty, many of us don't know what democracy means. Many of us don't know what liberties are. Many of us don't even know what freedom. You've got freedom and you've got liberty, right? Black people have been fighting for freedom. White people want their liberties because they're like, I'm already free. So we have to understand we're on a continuum here. And really, let me start with you, Sue. Defending rights and dissent, they need your support because they defend our rights and they defend our right to speak up and out.
Right. And And it's so important. And as I think we all kind of agree, like the first step is voting. You've got to vote, right? As Santita said, if you don't vote, that's also a vote. And so you've got to get out there and vote, but you can't stop at that, right? Our democracy doesn't work if people stop at that, if people stop paying attention. And agree with you, Santita, you need to question, right? You've got to question authority. That's that's my Bible. And I would say kind of parallel to this that we haven't talked about is we kind of package it as the right to know and the freedom to act. You need to know what your government's doing. The government, you have to find out what your government's doing. You need to pay attention, but the government also needs to be forthcoming and not hold so many secrets from the population. And you've got to act. We've got to act.
Amen to that. Reverend Wilson, 1 minute for you.
Well, I think we have to know what the vote controls, why your vote is important, and you have to look down ballot. You may never see the president. You may see the vice president. You may see your congressperson. You should. You may see your U.S. senators. But then as you go down the ballot, it's your state representatives, your state legislators, your county persons, your county sheriff, your county commissioner. All of these people matter in your everyday life. And then you keep going all the way down to school board elections, like we have in Chicago for the first time. Those people are determining what your children, what curriculum they will have, what books they can or cannot have. And they're not necessarily educators. They're ordinary people making major decisions about your child. And, so we have to look at mayors. They control city budgets that come from the feds and the states. So every vote matters. Your participation in the electoral process really matters more. You gotta hold them accountable. Don't just talk to the radio or to the television.
Oh my goodness, or talk to me. I love talking to you. But
call with me because
come on.
You want them to do something. You call them. You pay them. A lot of people do.
Well, we need to know that. Ed, 1 minute for you.
I think when we think about the Constitution, what it really does is give us a structure and an ability to create change. What we're talking about here in many ways is the desire that many of us have. I think, as Sue said, those of us who are righteous or right-minded, to think about the kind of change we want to make. And then it is really a matter of acting on that, of being patient, of playing the long game, of continuing to advocate for the things we want, even when we don't get them all at once, or when we don't even get them at all in a few occasions. I keep thinking about, I've reached that point in my life, Santita, where I often think about like how long I've been involved in much of this work, and it's a long time. And the truth is there's been great change. None of it is guaranteed to last unless we continue to do the work. And all that the Constitution gives us is the opportunity to do that work. And it gives us the opportunity to even change that structure so that we're able to do even more of the things that we want and that we value at all levels of government. And that's really the thing, for all of us, that again, where we talk about saving democracy, the most important part of that is remembering that democracy is not a spectator sport.
Get involved. Ed Yonka, Director of Communications, Public Policy, ACLU of Illinois. One of my heroes, another heroine, Sue Udry, Defending Rights and Dissent. Thank you for the work that you do, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, Esquire. I've run out of breath. With all that you do every day, Director of the Push for Excellence program, but also a lawyer, a pastor. All of you are serving people and helping us and inspiring us to get involved. And we need to do that. That's how you save the country. You get involved.
Yes.
Everybody, let us move on in the next hour and let's talk about this toxic political environment. I thought I was seeing things when I saw that President Trump had survived yet another assassination attempt. What is going on? Let us not act as if we've not had a toxic political environment for a long time. It's been here. They shoot horses, don't they? And we shoot political leaders, unfortunately. And we have to stop. We've got to grow up in our politics. You don't have to like someone, but you do need to respect them. And I will tell you this, one of the things that I learned from For my family, I remember praying for George Wallace. My mother had me do that when he was shot. Because she said, this is the kind of your father has people who don't like him too. And we're Christian. So we pray for him. But Donald Trump has people who love him too. Think about that. Think about that. Get on the other side of your pointed finger. Get on the other side of your thought about someone. Let's talk about this toxic environment in which we're living. We got to clean out this tank, everybody. Dump the water, get some fresh water in. This is not working. Go to vote.org. Make sure that you're still registered to vote. Vote.org. And if you have trouble at the polling place, because early voting has started for many people, do not leave until you've gotten it resolved. I think it's 866 our vote. 866 our vote. Is that it, Ed Yanka?
That's it.
866 our vote. OURVOTE. 866 our vote. Do not leave the polling place until you have spoken with these lawyers and you have gotten your directions, your marching orders. Let's talk about this toxic political environment and how we can get things right. More on the Santita Jackson Show. Sending you much love, Sue Udry and Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson and Ed Yanka here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. See you in the next hour.